Most people have no idea their brain is quietly changing. Not their memory, not their thinking speed, something deeper. 5 specific abilities your brain controls silently, behind the scenes, without ever sending you a warning. And if your brain still does these 5 things, you're not just aging well. You're in the top 5% mentally for your age group. My name is Dr. David Mercer. I've spent 26 years as a neurologist at the Mayo Clinic, studying cognitive aging in over 9,000 patients between the ages of 70 and 95. What I've discovered will change how you think about your own brain. Here's what most doctors never tell you. The brain doesn't decline randomly. It follows a pattern, a specific sequence. And that sequence always starts with these 5 abilities, long before memory problems ever appear. Most people wait until they're forgetting names and misplacing keys before they pay attention. By then, the real damage started years earlier. Last month, a man named Walter sat across from me in my office. He was 74. His wife had driven him in and was sitting in the waiting room. He'd insisted on coming alone. He walked in steady, looked me in the eye when he shook my hand. He said, "Dr. Mercer, my wife thinks something is wrong with me. I feel completely fine." I told Walter we were going to run a few simple tests. Not memory tests. 5 quick assessments. Different things entirely. He agreed. 10 minutes later, Walter had failed 4 of them. He had absolutely no idea. His wife wasn't wrong. Walter had been adapting so gradually he couldn't see it himself. He'd stopped driving at night, said he just preferred daytime. He'd started sitting closer to the television, said the old spot wasn't comfortable anymore. He'd let his wife handle the grocery list, said she was better at remembering what they needed. These weren't preferences. These were compensations. His brain was adjusting around abilities it had already lost, and Walter was following along without noticing. That's the most dangerous kind of decline. The kind that feels like a choice. Before I reveal what these 5 abilities are, subscribe right now. What I'm about to share is worth more than most doctors will cover in a routine appointment. The people who act on this information early are the ones still thriving at 90. Sign number 1. Here's what nobody tells you about the aging brain. It doesn't fail in your memory first. It fails in a completely different place, one most people never think about until it's already too late. And the clearest window into what's actually happening is something called divided attention, your ability to do 2 things at once. Let me explain what's actually happening inside your brain. Your prefrontal cortex, the front portion of your brain that manages executive function, begins losing density after age 70. The white matter, which is the wiring that connects different brain regions, starts degrading. Signals between regions slow down. What used to happen in parallel now has to happen in sequence. Your brain shifts from a multi-lane highway to a single-lane road, and you won't feel that shift. You'll just notice the traffic backing up. Carol was 71, retired school teacher, sharp as ever when it came to conversation. She came to see me after her daughter noticed something unusual. Carol sat down and said, "Doctor, I can talk or I can walk, but I can't seem to do both anymore. I literally have to stop moving when someone asks me a question. People must think I'm strange." I tested Carol. I asked her to walk down my hallway while counting backward from 100 by 7s. She stopped dead after 2 steps, completely froze. Her walking speed dropped 40% the moment I gave her the cognitive task. Normal for her age is maintaining at least 80% of walking speed during a mental challenge. Carol was down to 60%. That gap told me everything. This wasn't Carol being distracted. This was her prefrontal cortex no longer able to allocate resources across tasks simultaneously. Her daughter had seen it before Carol had. That's how invisible this kind of decline really is. A study from Stanford followed 3,400 adults aged 70 to 85 for 8 years. The ones who showed early divided attention deficits had 4 times the rate of falls within 3 years compared to those who maintained dual task ability. 4 times. Not because of weak legs or poor balance, because their brains couldn't supervise movement and process the environment at the same time. The body stopped listening to the brain while the brain was busy doing something else. Think about what that means for everything from crossing a street to carrying groceries down a flight of stairs. Here's how you test this right now. Stand up and walk across the room while naming every animal that starts with the letter A out loud. Don't stop walking. Keep both going at the same time. If your feet slow down, if you pause your steps to think, if you stop walking entirely before you answer, your divided attention is already compromised. Be honest about what happens. Most people are shocked. Carol started what I call the walking conversation drill. Every morning, 10 minutes of walking while listening to a simple podcast and counting her steps out loud at the same time. It sounds unusual. It works. Your prefrontal cortex responds to the exact type of challenge it's losing. Use it the right way, and it rebuilds what age has been quietly taking. 6 weeks later, Carol walked my hallway counting backward from 100 without slowing her pace once. She told me afterward, "Doctor, I didn't realize I had lost that. I just thought I was getting more thoughtful." That's how completely we adapt around our own decline, until we finally stop being able to adapt. Sign number 2. But here's where most people completely miss the early warning. Everyone assumes memory is the first cognitive ability to go. It isn't. What fades first, quietly and without announcement, is something called processing speed. Your brain's raw clock rate, how fast it handles new information coming in. At 25, when you see a car brake suddenly ahead of you, your brain registers it, calculates distance, assesses danger, and fires the command to your foot within about 200 milliseconds. At 75, that same processing takes closer to 350 milliseconds. That extra fraction of a second doesn't sound like much. At 40 miles per hour, your car travels 8 more feet during that delay. That's the gap between a near miss and a collision. That's the difference between catching a glass that's tipping and watching it shatter. Thomas was 76. He came in after his third fender bender in 18 months. His insurance had flagged his record. His daughter was asking him to consider giving up the car. He was devastated. He sat across from me and said, "Doctor, I am the most careful driver I know. I follow every rule. I don't speed. I don't tailgate. I just can't seem to react fast enough anymore. And it scares me." I ran a standard reaction time protocol. Thomas's visual processing speed was clocking at the 15th percentile for his age group. But what alarmed me even more was his pattern recognition speed. I showed him a series of common road signs briefly on a screen. Stop, yield, merge, left curve ahead. He identified every one correctly, but with a delay. His brain was reading accurately. It was reading slowly. The information was still getting in. The clock had simply slowed down. A study from the University of Pittsburgh tested processing speed in 2,800 drivers over age 70 across 5 years. Those in the bottom quartile of processing speed had 6 times the at-fault accident rate of those in the top quartile. 6 times. Not because they were reckless drivers, not because they didn't care, because their brains had slowed down in a way they couldn't see or feel. The judgment was still there. The speed was not. Try this right now. Pick up your phone and open any simple reaction app, the kind that asks you to tap a shape the moment it appears on screen. Tap as fast as you can for 1 minute and note your average response time. If your average reaction consistently exceeds 500 milliseconds, your processing speed is below the safe functional threshold for your age group. This isn't about technology or video games. It's about whether your brain is still running at the speed that daily life requires. Thomas started a daily processing speed routine. Simple reaction drills on his phone every morning. Card games that required rapid visual scanning in the afternoon. Just 10 minutes total. 3 months later, his scores had climbed 22%. His neurologist cleared him to drive with a refresher course. On the day of his next appointment with me, he drove himself. He walked into my office, sat down, and said, "My daughter doesn't worry about me anymore when I back out of the driveway." That's what this is really about. Not just driving. Everything that comes with being the one who can still go where they want to go. Now, here's where it gets serious. The first 2 signs, divided attention and processing speed, those are the early warnings. They are your brain's version of a low fuel indicator. They're uncomfortable to discover, but you can act on them now and recover real ground. The next 3 signs, these are the ones that actually take away independence. They're the reason people stop living alone. The reason families have those painful conversations about memory care. The reason someone goes from fully themselves to somebody else's responsibility in less than 2 years. And the third sign is happening inside your brain right now, at this very moment, with no pain and no warning and no signal of any kind. Sign number 3. This one sneaks up on everyone. It has a scientific name that most doctors don't bother explaining. It's called working memory, your brain's live mental workspace, the ability to hold information in your mind while you actively use it, not your memory of the past. The live, working, present tense memory your brain runs on every single day. Let me explain what's actually happening. Your hippocampus, the memory hub located deep in your temporal lobe, shrinks by about 1 to 2% per year after age 70. At the same time, the fiber connections between your hippocampus and your prefrontal cortex start to weaken. Think of working memory like a whiteboard in a classroom. In your 30s, you had a large whiteboard and fast markers. After 70, the whiteboard gets smaller, and someone keeps partially erasing it while you're still writing. Things disappear before you've finished using them. Ruth was 72. She came to see me after a frightening incident in her kitchen. She had put a pot of water on to boil, walked to the living room to watch the news. 10 minutes later, she smelled something burning. She'd forgotten the pot entirely. She sat in my office looking genuinely shaken. "Doctor," she said, "I've cooked every single day of my life for 50 years. I don't forget things. I'm not that kind of person." But it kept happening. Taking her medication twice in one day because she couldn't remember if she'd already taken it. Missing a doctor's appointment she'd been sure she'd remembered. Her daughter had offered to move in. Ruth had refused. She was terrified it was the beginning of something she couldn't come back from. I tested Ruth's working memory with a digit span protocol. She could reliably hold 4 digits forward and only 2 in reverse. Normal for her age is 6 forward and 4 backward. Her mental whiteboard had shrunk by almost half, and it had happened so gradually she hadn't caught it happening at all. A study from UC Berkeley followed 2,600 seniors over 70 for 10 years. Those whose working memory scores fell below the 30th percentile at baseline had 3 times the rate of functional dependence by age 80. 3 times. Not from their long-term memories of the past failing, from the live mental workspace they needed for cooking, for managing medications, for staying safe at home, shrinking down to where it could no longer support daily life. Here's how you test your working memory right now. Read these 7 numbers once and only once, then look away. 8, 3, 7, 1, 9, 4, 6. Close your eyes. Repeat them in reverse order. If you can recall 5 or more in reverse, your working memory is intact. If you struggle past 3 digits backward, it's already weaker than it should be for your age. Don't skip this. Try it honestly. Ruth started what I call the mental load drill. Every day, she memorized her grocery list by heart instead of writing it down. Not because writing lists is wrong, but as specific exercise for working memory. She repeated the list in her head while making breakfast, rehearsed it before leaving the house, added 1 more item each week until she was managing 12. 8 weeks later, Ruth called me and said, "Doctor, I haven't forgotten the stove once, not 1 time. I actually feel like myself again. My daughter is staying at her own house. Your brain rebuilds the connections you demand of it, not completely, but enough to matter enormously." Sign number 4. Here's what nobody talks about when it comes to brain aging. Everyone focuses on memory and thinking speed. Nobody talks about spatial reasoning. Your brain's ability to mentally rotate objects, navigate new environments, and accurately understand your position in 3-dimensional space. And after 70, this system can start declining faster than almost anything else in your cognitive profile. Let me explain what's happening inside your brain. Your parietal lobes, located toward the top and back of your skull, manage spatial processing. They maintain your brain's internal map of the world. They tell you where your body is in space, whether a gap is wide enough to walk through, whether a step is higher than it looks, whether the car to your left is moving faster than it appears. After 70, parietal lobe volume decreases by roughly 5% per decade. The internal map your brain maintains of the physical world starts losing resolution. And you won't know it because the map still feels accurate to you. You'll just keep misjudging distances that you're absolutely certain you've correctly assessed. George was 78. He came to me after 3 separate incidents in the parking lot of his grocery store. Minor scrapes, nothing serious, but accumulating. His family had started commenting. He sat across from me looking defensive and embarrassed. "Doctor," he said, "I can see the space perfectly clearly. I look right at it. I take my time. I don't know why my car keeps ending up too close." He wasn't lying. He wasn't being careless. He was genuinely baffled. I tested George with a standard 3-dimensional rotation task and a depth perception and spatial judgment protocol. His spatial accuracy had declined 35% from age-typical norms. His brain was seeing the world correctly. It was computing the geometry of it incorrectly. He had driven for 54 years without incident. He was mortified that his children were questioning his judgment. This wasn't George becoming irresponsible. This was his parietal cortex losing the precision it had operated with his entire adult life. A study from Johns Hopkins tested spatial reasoning in 3,100 adults over age 72 across 7 years. Those with low spatial reasoning scores at the start of the study had 5 times the rate of navigational errors, driving incidents, and home-based falls compared to those with intact spatial ability. 5 times. Because when your brain's map of the world becomes inaccurate, everything that depends on that map becomes unpredictable. Stairs, parking, reaching across a table, walking through a doorway with your hands full. Here's your spatial awareness test right now. Without moving your hand, look at where it's resting. Now close your eyes. Point to a specific target directly across the room, a door handle, a light switch, something fixed. Open your eyes. How far off were you? If you missed by more than 5 or 6 inches on a target you were just looking at moments ago, your spatial sense and your body's positioning are already drifting apart. Most people are surprised by how significant that gap is. George started what I call the spatial awareness circuit. Every morning, he walked a slightly different path through his house with his eyes partly closed, relying on his spatial sense rather than his vision. He practiced spatial judgment with daily mental rotation puzzles. He walked parking lots on foot before driving them. 4 months later, he passed a formal cognitive driving evaluation. His daughter called me at the office. She said, "He took us out to dinner last night and we didn't hold our breath the whole way there. Independence isn't something you either have or you don't. It's something you practice until it holds." Sign number 5. And this might be the most important sign of all, because it determines whether your brain can adapt around everything else. It's called cognitive reserve, your brain's built-in capacity to compensate for physical decline, to reroute around damaged connections and maintain function even as the underlying structure changes with age. Let me explain what's actually happening. Every complex skill you've ever learned, every problem you've ever solved, every conversation and relationship and creative challenge you've engaged with has created synaptic connections in your brain. Think of these connections as a network of backup roads. When your main cognitive highways start degrading with age, a brain with high cognitive reserve can route traffic through alternate paths. It stays functional even as the infrastructure underneath it degrades. A brain with low cognitive reserve has only the main highways. When those fail, traffic stops entirely. And the tragic truth is that the reserve you need was built years ago and must be actively maintained right now, or it begins to quietly close down. Elizabeth was 80. She came to see me because her family was frightened. Her husband had passed away the year before. In the months that followed, she had stopped going to her book club, stopped cooking complicated recipes, stopped doing anything that required sustained mental effort. She sat in my office and said, "Doctor, it's just easier not to. Everything feels harder than it used to. I get tired from thinking now. I just want things simple." I tested Elizabeth's cognitive reserve markers and her performance profile. Her processing speed had declined 30% in the 2 years since her husband died. Her attention test scores had dropped 25%. Her verbal fluency was significantly reduced. But what struck me was that she had the neural foundation to recover meaningful function. Decades of education, a lifelong reading habit, years of active social and intellectual engagement. She had built enormous cognitive reserve earlier in her life, but she was drawing it down at a dangerous rate by stopping every single thing that had built it. This wasn't her inevitable decline. This was a woman walking away from her own brain, one quiet day at a time. A study from Rush University followed 200 adults over age 80 for 9 years. Those who maintained regular cognitive engagement, specifically reading, social interaction, and learning new and unfamiliar skills, had a 48% lower rate of cognitive decline compared to those who withdrew from mental activity. Not slower decline, less total decline, nearly half as much. Here's your test right now. Ask yourself honestly, when did you last learn something genuinely new? Not something familiar, something that required your brain to build a connection it didn't already have. A recipe from a cuisine you've never cooked. A route to somewhere familiar that you'd never taken before. A new word in another language. A card game with unfamiliar rules. A musical instrument even at the most basic level. If you're struggling to think of the last time, your cognitive reserve is not being actively maintained. It is quietly closing. Elizabeth went back to her book club. She started learning to make video calls so she could connect with her grandchildren 3 times a week. She took a beginner watercolor class at her local library on Tuesday mornings. It felt absurd to her at first. She told me later she'd almost quit the first week. 6 months after that first appointment, she walked into my office with a folder and put 8 watercolor paintings on my desk one by one. She looked at me and said, "Doctor, my brain doesn't feel empty anymore. I feel like I'm still here. That's what this is really about. Not test scores, not clinical measures. Feeling present, being fully in your own life instead of watching it from a distance." Walter came back to see me 4 months after that first appointment. You remember Walter? The man who came in insisting he was completely fine, failed 4 out of 5 assessments, and left looking as though he'd been told something he wasn't ready to hear. He drove himself to the appointment this time. His wife stayed home. He walked in, sat down, and looked me directly in the eye. He said, "Doctor, I was embarrassed when I left here the first time." He paused for a moment. "I thought you were wrong about me. Then I tried those tests at home and I realized you weren't." He'd spent 4 months doing every exercise I'd prescribed. The walking conversation drill every morning, daily reaction training on his phone, the mental load practice with his grocery list, the spatial awareness circuit, and he had rejoined his old chess club, twice a week without missing a session. I retested him, divided attention 80% of baseline maintained. Processing speed improved 18%. Working memory digit span back to 5 forward and 3 backward. Spatial accuracy within normal range. Cognitive reserve engagement, active and consistent for the first time in years. He looked at those numbers on the page and said, "I got my brain back. That's what I'm fighting for. That's what this is really about. Not slowing the slope, not managing symptoms, reclaiming the mental life that felt like it was starting to slip away. Your brain doesn't give up easily. It gives up when you stop making demands of it. Stop the divided attention practice and the prefrontal connections thin. Stop the processing speed work, and your reaction time slips further. Stop learning new things, and the backup pathways start to close. Your brain needs challenge to stay connected. It needs engagement to stay present. It needs to be treated like the extraordinary organ it is, not put on the shelf and hope to maintain itself. Your independence in 10 years is being shaped right now by whether you choose to engage or withdraw. Start today, not tomorrow, not next week. Today, pick one sign. Work on it for 2 weeks, then add the next. No equipment needed, no clinic required. Just 10 minutes each morning and the willingness to ask something real of your brain. Age is not the enemy. Quietly giving up is. Nobody can do this work for you. No pill restores cognitive reserve. No supplement rebuilds working memory. No treatment substitutes for consistent daily demand on the brain you still have. Your brain built everything in your life that matters. Every face you recognize. Every place that feels like home. Every person who relies on you. It deserves to be challenged, protected, and trusted to keep delivering. Start today. Your brain is still capable of remarkable things. The only question is whether you'll begin asking it to prove that.